Human-centric lighting, quest for a better phrase. The aim of this lecture is to dissect the entire phrase human-centric lighting. By dissecting, I mean first is to understand the appropriate context of this phrase, how and why is it being used, identify the underlying issue with the use and the abuse of this phrase. We all know this phrase has been used well, but also has been abused more often than not. And then finally, explore alternative phrases to what this whole human-centric lighting encapsulates, what it encompasses. So what does the phrase human-centric lighting encompass? Firstly, it's all about visual responses because human beings want to see a space. And the visual responses that the eye perceives lighting has to be taken into consideration, firstly in terms of the light level. So the quantity of light, both in terms of radiometric and photometric units, simply because light is a particle theory and a wave theory. So quantum mechanics says that light consists of photons, and wave theory says that lighting consists of waves and radiations. So the quantity of light has to be determined both in terms of radiometric and photometric units. Then comes the light spectrum. And light spectrum is primarily about the spectral power distribution, that is governing the color quality of the light, whether it's warm or cool light. And then finally, and very importantly, is the spatial and temporal patterns in terms of timing, duration, luminance distribution within the 3D light field. Now, looking at these two examples of images, both are white spaces. On the right, you have a more cooler kind of a tone of white space. On the image on the left, you have a very warm tone. So essentially, there is although they are white spaces, there's some essential and fundamental differences into what the kind of characteristics these spaces emote. So it may be the lampshades or the color of this warm carpet that makes the space into a very warm and a cozy atmosphere on the left. But on the right, it's the cooler tone of light that makes it a much more formal and a little more colder space. Although cold may essentially not be bad, but then it's a different kind of a feel to it. So it's the light level, the light spectrum, and the spatial and temporal patterns that determine the quality of the space, although essentially both are just white spaces. And finally, it also determines what kind of function that is going to be there in the spaces. Next, and very importantly, is the biological responses. We all know human beings have a circadian response where there is a 24-hour internal biological clock that processes and regulates the physiological responses within the brain. And this is primarily determined by a hormone that is produced in the brain within the pineal gland called melatonin. And melatonin is a very essential hormone because it has a lot of pleiotropic effects in the terms of it's an antioxidant, it's an anti-inflammation agent, it's anti-hypertensive, so that it's very good for controlling the rest of your organs. It helps you sleep. It is a good mode of making all your other organs work properly. And all of this is determined by light because light suppresses melatonin and it also shifts the timing of the circadian rhythms. So our diurnal circles are determined by light. And there is something called a neuroendocrine response, wherein our brain regulates the hormones, which is, again, back to the melatonin. And this is what creates the central clock within the body. And this goes ahead and controls the peripheral clocks, which is the rest of your organs, which is your liver, your heart, your kidneys. And the functioning of all of these organs are made in sync by this central biological clock, which is determined by melatonin. So all our biological responses are determined by light. And then, which is the behavioral response, which is also part of human-centric lighting. Now, there is a neurobehavioral response in the sense that all our nervous systems, which are controlled by the brain, which regulate the human behavior. And our nervous system can be broadly divided into a sympathetic nervous system, which is stimulates the fight or the flight response. So whenever we face any kind of a situation, it is the sympathetic nervous system that tells us whether we should stand and fight or we just need to look at the other direction and run away for a flight. And there's the other system called the parasympathetic nervous system, which stimulates your rest and digest and the feed and breed processes. So this is more a relaxed process. So if you look at the biological diagram on your right, what the parasympathetic nervous system does is it stimulates your bile release, it helps you digest, stimulates your peristalsis and secretion of the hormones within the stomach. It also controls the breathing pattern in terms of having your heartbeat and your lungs work in tandem. Most importantly, one of the key aspects that happens with the parasympathetic nervous system, it constricts your pupils. So if you look at this image of the eye here, parasympathetic nervous system reduces the size of the pupil in the sense that it allows a very limited amount of light to come inside your eye. So that way, you're in a much more relaxed state of mind being. The sympathetic nervous system is just the opposite of this, wherein it dilates your pupils in the sense if you've entered a space where there's very little light, your pupils dilate. So what it does, it increases your heartbeat, a lot of your hormone secretion is stopped, there is more glucose production. It also increases the amount of adrenaline that is produced for a fight or a flight situation. Interestingly, this entire system is also related to light, because if you look at the eyes, excess light means that your pupils contract, and this is a sign for the parasympathetic nervous system to relax. And less light means your sympathetic nervous system activates because your pupil dilates to allow more light inside, and then your behavioral pattern also changes based on the expansion or contraction of your pupils. So all of these are related to the human-centric lighting, and that's where the whole human-centric lighting encompasses, wherein your visual, your biological, and your behavioral responses. So where is the issue? Now, I read a very seminal work called Human-Centric Lighting, Myth, Magic, or Metaphor by a very famous set of scientists, which include Kevin Hauser and Peter Boyce. And what they say is that human-centric lighting is not a myth, because as we've seen, it is very real. All the visual responses, the biological responses, and the behavioral responses are real, and they're all related to light. It's also not magic, because we have a set of manufacturers who use this human-centric lighting phrase in a very hollow manner, where they have a lot of exaggerated health claims simply to gain consumer comfort and social credibility. So what we as consumers or intelligent users have to understand is that it's a very tenuous way of saying that any product can be applied in ways that may not support positive outcomes. So just because a light fixture changes color temperature from warm to cool doesn't necessarily make it a human-centric light fixture. Okay, it only satisfied one aspect of human-centric lighting, but it doesn't encompass everything. So as aware users, we need to be skeptical of any such product without reviewing its outcomes. So this is where this whole presentation goes into a quest as to what is it that could be an appropriate phrase to describe human-centric lighting. And I did come across some very interesting phrases. First phrase was determined by the Commission of Illumination Engineering, which is International Commission of Illumination, which is called integrative lighting. By the word integrating, it means that it elicits visual, biological, and behavioral responses, which is appropriate for humans. And integrative lighting is all about manipulating the spatial and temporal patterns with magnitude and spectrum of light. And the method that is followed is a scientific design method that is to benefit the humans. So it's not just about changing color temperature, but the change of color temperature, the illumination, is a very context-specific thing, wherein early in the morning you might need a very neutral tone of light. As the afternoon progresses, the daylight becomes very bluish tone. So that would mean the space has to have that kind of a characteristics of light. And as evening comes in, with the dusk and light being more warmer, evening light tends to get a little bit more warm. So that is again just one aspect of integrative lighting. Interestingly, I came across so many other phrases, one of them being biomimetic lighting. The phrase biomimicry comes from this scientific phase where you imitate elements, models, and systems of nature to solve complex problems. And this is something which a lot of architects tend to do, is to use biomimicry in their architectural designs. So biomimetic lighting is to emulate nature's process of gathering, focusing, and distributing light. And most of the time, the method is an innovation design method that is used to achieve better performance. So if you see these skylights or windows, they're not real skylights, they're actually artificial skylights, which have been made by a very famous Italian manufacturer. And what it does is it has a very interesting optical property of replicating the way daylight moves. And to create, so if it could be a basement space, or it could be a room, or a metro station where there's no daylight coming inside. And in such areas, you can use this biomimicry. You can really create a skylight effect in underground to give this effect of light and gives you this closeness to nature. Another phrase that I did come across was biophilic lighting. And biophilia is a term where you connect humans with nature by maintaining alignment with its rhythms. So biophilic lighting means to replicate the experiences of nature and design and to reinforce that connection with nature. And the method involved is an evidence-based design methods for improving well-being. So if you see the image on the right, you have this dappled effect of light filtering through trees, almost giving like a rainforest effect. And the same thing is replicated in this image on the left, where you see these spotlights focusing light on this gobo kind of a projection pattern that is given. And what it does, it creates a ceiling effect of this dappled effect of light. So this is one way of giving this connection with nature, of providing this whole dappled effect within the interiors. And one more phrase that is being used for maybe so many decades now is sustainable lighting. And what does sustainability entail? It is to meet the needs of the present without compromising the future. And we all know what it is, because there's so much of light pollution, there's so much of pollution of materials. So what sustainable lighting does is to protect and promote nature's health with high quality designs. And the method is more a conservation method that reduces chemical waste, reduces the life cycle waste, and also reduces the sky pollution caused by the light. So all of these phrases led me to another phrase called biodynamic lighting. So biodynamics is a sustainable farming system where you have organic local materials for use for soil conditioning and to create a very sustainable way of creating local produce. So biodynamic lighting would actually mean that you sustainably achieve biological effects of natural light within your designs. And the method would be a combination of integrative lighting, biomimetic lighting, biophilic lighting, and sustainable lighting. So you combine all the best aspects of these and come into one form called biodynamic lighting. So what would biodynamic lighting entail? So it's a step-by-step process as provided by Carl Hastrick, where you make a list of functions that are performed inside a space. Then you translate them into biological terms as to how nature would actually perform these functions. Then you discover nature's rules for solving these translated functions. And then you abstract it, because you cannot literally translate it. You need to reinterpret these rules in terms of design. And then you emulate this with a design solution that is formed from these reinterpreted design terms. And finally, once the design is ready, you need to evaluate this design solution against the original brief of what are the lists of functions, are they being performed well, and also see how nature's rules of discovered in step 3 are being implemented in step 6. So finally, what could be the possible solutions with biodynamic lighting? What we could first have is lighting that provides a healthy environment for all living beings. Now, the whole problem with this phrase human-centric lighting is that it's a very self-centered phrase, because human beings, we all know, is a very self-centered being, is a very selfish being, and too focused upon himself or herself. So what we need to do is expand our vision, and this whole biological potency of light should be simplified and understood, and it should be such that it is applicable to other living beings too, to animals, plants, birds, fishes. All of this come into play. So whenever we design a space, we need to see that the healthy environment is provided not just for humans, it's for the entire biome of living beings. How would that be possible? Is to first have lighting that is providing closeness to nature. That can be done by embracing the sun and the sky. So humans first need to start enjoying the bright days. And during the day, you need to embrace the sun and the sky. And at night, embrace darkness. So minimize the use of light at night so that not just the humans can sleep properly, but all the other living beings, which include plants, animals, birds, fishes, they all could go off to sleep, embrace this darkness. And there are other functions that are performed at night by a lot of these nocturnal animals that need to take into consideration. So embrace days, embrace the darkness too, together. So lighting is a combination of light and darkness. Lighting that provides meaningful interaction. So what we need lighting to do is to deliver content, delight, and functions via embodied activities. By embodied activities, this just doesn't mean using a smartphone. Humans perform so many activities of moving around, actions. Now you see this installation on the right. You have these people blowing into these light fixtures to control the brightness. So what we need biodynamic lighting to is to sense the human or activity patterns, and based on that provide the kind of illumination or spectrum based on breath control, based on body movements, embodied movements, actions, action oriented kind of lighting to provide that meaningful interaction. And finally, lighting that contributes to a circular economy. So we just don't think about wasting. What we do is think about is reduce, reuse, and repair. So there's a refurbishment of light fixtures, there's a reuse of light fixtures, so that resources are conserved, there is less problems of landfill and wasting of products. So there is this whole mechanism of design, production, distribution, consumption, and collection, which is a cradle to cradle kind of a system. So very less goes to the landfill, there is very less that is goes to wastage, and every part of the lighting is incorporated. So with this, I'd like to end my presentation, and hopefully this has given you a little bit more thought process as to what could be a better phrase instead of just using human-centric lighting. Thank you.